Perfect. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Opine Dine, a free 14-session virtual panel series brought to you by the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force's Public Awareness Subcommittee. My name is Danielle Thomas, and I will be your moderator tonight. I am the Victim Services Coordinator for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, and I am honored to be guiding this conversation this evening. From our first session on Human Trafficking 101, we have dived into more specific topics within the umbrella of human trafficking, such as grooming, child sex trafficking, child sex abuse material. And tonight's session is still within that second phase of our series where we shift the conversation to resources. Tonight, we will be focused on forensic response and investigation. We have an incredible group of experts with us, and I will introduce them to you in just a moment. But before we do that, let's dive into a few quick housekeeping items. This session is being recorded for the first 55 minutes, and that is so that it can be shared with those who are unable to attend live. If you prefer not to be in the recording, please keep your camera off and avoid unmuting during the recorded portion. The recording will end before the audience Q&A, so you're able to ask questions freely during that final portion of the session without being recorded. Please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. The chat is open throughout the session. Feel free to introduce yourself, share resources, and submit questions for our panelists. Our chat monitor, Melinda Boyer, will be collecting questions and surfacing them during the audience Q&A portion beginning around 6:55. If you do experience any technical difficulties, try leaving and rejoining the meeting or sending a message in the chat, and we'll do our best to assist. If at any point during tonight's conversation something feels difficult, please know that support is available. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-3737-888, and the crisis text line is HOME to 233-733, and we'll also be able to put that in the chat for you as well. We encourage engagement throughout the panel, so feel free to use the chat to share thoughts, resources, to respond to discussion prompts. We just simply ask that all comments remain respectful, on topic, and considerate of the diverse experiences and perspectives of everyone participating. Okay, so let me introduce tonight's panelists. First, we have Debbie Holbrook from Mercy Medical. Debbie attended Wilmington University for both graduate and undergraduate studies. After working in the field of critical care, Ms. Holbrook founded a forensic nurse examiner program in Delaware that became a model of the United States. In 2002, she testified on Capitol Hill before a Senate Judicial Subcommittee on Crime and Drugs on behalf of the bill that became the DNA Justice Act. She is a subject expert for the Department of Justice and the U.S. military and has developed a model for mobility in forensic care. Holbrook was inducted as a fellow to the American Academy of Nursing in 2018 and is the recipient of numerous international awards, including the ANCC Magnet International Nurse of the Year, the Delaware Nurse of the Year, the International Association of Forensic Nurses Pioneer Award, and the 2014 Most Influential Marylanders in Healthcare. Holbrook has authored grants totaling over $11 million benefiting victims of major persons crimes and lectures both nationally and internationally on violence-related topics. She has conducted more than 200 pediatric and adult SANE educational offerings. Holbrook has integrated comprehensive forensic practice into a nursing model, and her programs have cared for all patients of interpersonal violence across the lifespan, including domestic, institutional, vulnerable populations, gunshots, stabbings, non-accidental poisonings, and burns. She has pioneered the use of the alternate light source in strangulation cases and has set precedents in the international court system. She is currently the director of forensic nursing at Mercy Medical Center in Baltimore, which coordinates care to victims of interpersonal violence for all hospitals in Baltimore City. Debbie, we are so excited to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
I am so honored to have been invited.
Okay, next we have Wendy Myers. Wendy is with Maryland Children's Alliance. Wendy has more than 20 years of leadership experience in the Child Advocacy Center, or CAC, movement, and has also served as a CAC facility dog handler for the past 8 years. She is the founding executive director of a child advocacy center in Maryland, where she established the multidisciplinary team and led the center to full National Children's Alliance NCA accreditation. After almost 16 years of leading a local CAC, Wendy moved to her current role as Executive Director of Maryland's Children's Alliance, the state chapter for Maryland's 24 CACs, and a nationally accredited state chapter of NCA. In this role, she leads statewide initiatives to strengthen child abuse response systems through leadership, training, technical assistance, and advocacy. Wendy holds a master's in science and a master's of science in psychology and a bachelor of arts in psychology with a concentration in child and adolescent development. She is currently a third-year doctoral student at Marymount University, where her research focuses on organizational systems and forensic interview neutrality within CACs. Wendy has presented at various conferences on topics including CAC leadership, MDT collaboration, and facility dog handling. She recently authored an online MDT training model for Evidentia Learning. Wendy was honored to be named Worcester County, Maryland Women of the Year in 2019 in recognition of her leadership and commitment to children and families. Wendy, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you.
Thank you.
All right, and now we have Kara Rose. Kara Rose currently serves as the Unit Chief over Training and Victim Protection at the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Countering Human Trafficking. Prior to her current position, she served as the Section Chief over Training and Outreach at the CCHT, organizing and fulfilling training requests both domestically and internationally. Prior to transitioning to the CCHT, she was the Human Exploitation Group Supervisor at the Homeland Security Investigations Office in Baltimore, Maryland. Ms. Rose has worked human smuggling and human trafficking investigations as a special agent in Michigan and Maryland prior to becoming a supervisor. Since 2008, Ms. Rose has been committed to providing victim protection assistance and human trafficking outreach to law enforcement, non-governmental organizations, medical professionals, social service providers, and other key stakeholders, while also actively investigating and supervising cases of human exploitation and other Homeland Security-related offenses. Ms. Rose has 24 years of federal law enforcement experience, including working as a U.S. Border Patrol agent in Yuma, Arizona, and Detroit, Michigan, before joining HSI in 2008. Kara, thank you so much for being here tonight with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
All right, and we have Kathy Pajaro. Kathy serves as the Research and Education Trainer at the Center of Hope. She began her career as a forensic interviewer at the center, conducting interviews in both English and Spanish. She later expanded her expertise by working as a forensic interviewer in Montgomery and Prince George's County before returning to the Center for Hope to join the Forensic Interview Research and Education team. In her current role, she develops and delivers training programs focused on forensic interviewing and child maltreatment, equipping professionals with the skills needed to engage effectively with children and families impacted by trauma. With experience conducting over 800 forensic interviews, Kathy is deeply committed to advancing best practices in the field. As the daughter of a Guatemalan and Nicaraguan parents, she is particularly dedicated to ensuring that forensic interview practices are culturally responsive and accessible to diverse communities. Through her work, she strives to enhance professionals' ability to navigate linguistic and cultural considerations, ultimately improving outcomes for children and families from all backgrounds. Kathy, thank you so much for being here tonight, and we are excited to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so last but not least, and hopefully no more tongue twisters for me, we have Laura Jessic. Laura is with in-process, see, already a tongue twister. Laura received her master's degree in forensic psychology from Marymount University. She began her professional career working with offenders in both probation and parole and sentencing advocacy before working as a residential case manager for female felons re-entering the community after incarceration. In this role, she saw the impact of policy and law on underserved populations and how trauma and systematic failures can lead to repeat interactions with the criminal justice system as both an offender and a victim. She then joined the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault to address policy and sexual assault response to improve survivor outcomes. As the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative and Sexual Assault Response Team Program Manager, she focuses heavily on policy development and improvement, engaging survivors affected by the untested rape kit backlog through victim notification, and supporting professionals that respond to sexual assault, including law enforcement, attorneys, and nurses. Laura is a member of the Maryland Sexual Assault Evidence Kit Policy and Funding Committee and supports state and local efforts to create systemic change, support survivor healing, and increase offender accountability. Laura, thank you so much for being here tonight. And that is it to introduce our panelists. We are super excited to have all of you guys. I feel like that's just like a little bit of how incredible our conversation is going to be. This is going to be a very robust and exciting conversation. So I know we have lots of you guys here from different parts of the work, nursing investigation, system work. I would like to start with what you guys actually see. What in your role, what does a crisis moment look like, and where would somebody in particular kind of interact with you to receive your services? So, Debbie, if you don't mind, I will go ahead and start with you.
All right. Well, for the last 32 years, I've seen patients who are victimized by just horrific persons crimes. They're in the forms of sexual assault, human trafficking, both sex and labor trafficking. We at Mercy designed the human trafficking community response model that's called Blue Dot, that a lot of you have heard of. And if you joined when Tom Stack was on, he may have shared more about that. We see elder abuse, neglect, and maltreatment, trafficking, and financial exploitation of our elders. And often we get those cases from other hospitals and from adult protective referrals. We see immigration cases where folks are seeking legal immigration based on torture and persecution in their country of origin, child abuse and neglect, domestic, and all forms of interpersonal violence. What's a crisis intervention for us? A crisis moment is when I see a patient who's been victimized by an unimaginable crime, and every one. Whenever I think I've heard it all, it's like the bar is raised in crime right now, and they get more and more horrific. They need guidance, they need kindness, they need answers, resources, medical care and treatment. Sometimes I feel like a nurse in the hospital in our role is the starting place for healing, right? It's how well they heal is sometimes directly related to how well we orchestrate their care and we vet the resources in our community and the stakeholders that refer to. And where would somebody see us interacting with a victim patient? Anywhere, absolutely anywhere. For 32 years, we've been a fully mobile program. So you'll see us at any hospital in the state of Maryland. You may see us at nursing homes, assisted living and group homes, prisons, central booking, college wellness centers, military bases, anywhere that we can facilitate an exam and there's enough light to take pictures, to be honest. We have a lovely set of suites here at Mercy, but that's not where we primarily do our work. It's out in the community. That's just a little bit about us.
I love what you said, though, really about kindness. And you really described everyone. There wasn't any, you described everyone. Everybody can fit into that. You don't have to be special or have a certain victimization or a certain vulnerability to potentially find yourself in that situation. And I love, again, what you said about kindness, and we're talking about vulnerable populations. I'd love to throw it over to Wendy and talk a little bit more about that youth vulnerable population and how really how does this integrate with crisis that are our youth and our young adults or our kids in the state of Maryland who might be dealing with crises. How would you and Debbie potentially overlap, and what does a crisis moment look like for somebody who works within a CAC?
Sure, thank you. So, Maryland Children's Alliance, and I'll probably say MCA for the rest of our time together, but I'll be referring to Maryland Children's Alliance. So, we convene the 24 Child Advocacy Centers, or CACs, in the state of Maryland. All 50 states do have a statewide chapter. So, if you're in Delaware or wherever you might happen to be, there is a statewide chapter that convenes the child advocacy centers within that state. So every jurisdiction in the state of Maryland does have a multidisciplinary team that investigates and prosecutes child abuse, including trafficking cases, exploitation. Each CAC also provides access to mental health services, medical services, which is where that overlap might be. Children and families that are impacted by physical abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation. And then a crisis for a CAC might look like an acute case where abuse or injury has occurred within the past 72 or so hours. When that happens, child safety, of course, has to be ensured. Contact with alleged offenders has to stop. And then, of course, medical treatment if needed. That would be, the first step, obviously.
I love how, first of all, I'm so grateful for the range that we have here because there's so much, even like Wendy, you being with MCA and involved with that CAC, um, all 24 CACs throughout the state. But then Kathy, having you be a part of this conversation with your expertise. And I know, Wendy, you also have experience as being a forensic interviewer as well. But Kathy, I'd love to talk to you really about your specific role with being a forensic interviewer. One, what does that mean? Like if let's say I know nothing and I'm like, forensic interview, what is that? And that sounds scary, especially if I'm a parent saying like, yeah, you can like totally talk to my kid. Walk me through a little bit of that if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, a forensic interview is a conversation between a child, a vulnerable adult, really anyone, and a trained interviewer that is fact-finding in nature, meaning it's part of one larger investigation. So a forensic interview is used as one piece of an investigation. It's meant to gather facts in a neutral and legally sound way, meaning that forensic interviews are often used in court. So if a case of child maltreatment or abuse is to reach a courtroom, a lot of times if it involves a child, a forensic interview is used as a piece of evidence in the courtroom. So it is a legally sound conversation between a child or the interviewee and an interviewer. It's audio and visually recorded, so it really captures exactly what is said in the interview room, exactly how it was said. It captures the body language. It captures nuances in language, things of that nature. And again, it's really used to support an investigation. And one of the biggest aspects of a forensic interview is that it is neutral. So a forensic interviewer typically it really depends on where you are jurisdictionally, but if you are a forensic interviewer, for example, at Center for Hope, you are not an investigator. So you don't make decisions about if a case gets indicated for abuse or if charges get brought forward. So the forensic interviewer is typically a neutral sort of third party in the middle person. And it's when we say that it's child friendly, it means that the child is really kept at the center of it. So we use practices that are rooted in research, and the methods of conducting a forensic interview are very open-ended questioning. So the child is meant to lead the interviewer to the information. The interviewer does not sort of prompt what the child is supposed to say. So it's very open-ended, and it's used exactly for that reason. Because again, if it's used in court, it needs to be legally sound. So the information needs to come organically from a child, which is why forensic interviewers really practice open-ended questioning and allows the child to sort of lead us in whatever direction they want to go. So yeah.
Could you also touch on the importance of, especially as a child, having or going through that forensic interview, and why it would be important to do that in your own native language?
So research suggests that, or research very much supports that doing a forensic interview in a child's native language is going to get us the most accurate information possible. Because when a child can speak with no barriers, right, with no fear of miscommunication or not knowing a word for something, it leads to more accurate information and more detailed disclosures. So it is very, very important that if available, because we know resources are not always available, but if available and whenever possible, if a child can conduct a forensic interview in their native language, it is going to get us the most accurate and reliable information from them.
Thank you. I appreciate you expanding on that. It's it's interesting, I think. Well, I'm not a forensic interviewer, so it's always interesting to talk to people who are trained as forensic interviewers because you guys ask questions so differently, and it's like, oh, it really is that open-ended. Like I feel like I'm like really diving into me of like, I don't know how to answer some of those questions, because it really is, again, as going back to what you said, like that it's a key part of that investigation. So throwing it over to Kara, being an investigator, how would, whether it's youth, young adults, children, adults, elders, whoever, how would you say that pieces of putting all those pieces together with that investigation, what is that like? What is it like to really, on like the nitty gritty, what is it like to investigate human trafficking? Because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I've been very thankful to have experienced a lot of Homeland Security investigations' ability to focus on human trafficking. So unlike, I mean, I feel like every federal and state and local agency has the potential to identify human trafficking, but HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, HSI for short, has really put a lot of investment into the victim-centered approach and making sure that we are combating these investigations from that standpoint, because as we know, unless we have a victim in our cases that is safe and secure and feels we're trusted enough for them to cooperate with us, we're not going to be able to have an entirely successful investigation, and probably not a prosecution. And that's our ultimate goal, right? Is to get that victim safe and secure and the resources that they need to be able to further the investigation and hopefully put a trafficker behind bars. So depending upon whether it's a sex trafficking or a forced labor or labor trafficking case, the investigations could look very different about how they come to us. Sometimes we have them come to us from a historical nature, and those are really difficult because we're really like, the potential for a lot of evidence to be lost is great, and it's really hard for us to be able to put together enough pieces for a successful prosecution, because the prosecutors aren't going to move forward with an investigation if they don't feel like they're going to be able to ultimately win the case at trial. So we have to work those cases very differently. But in like the crisis moments where we're getting called as a federal agency, because we have that stakehold in the anti-human trafficking space, and I think we've done a lot of good outreach and education to where our HSI offices are. They are focused on training and outreach to state and local law enforcement. So we are sometimes the first people to get called once a crisis moment has been identified by a state and local agency, or let's say we get a tip from the human trafficking tip line or our DHS tip line, where it's like immediate in nature, where we have to go out and triage what it is that has been reported to us, because it looks like there's some exigent circumstances going on and the victim needs to be rescued or assisted right away. So the cases could look very different how they come in, but when we get called by a state and local law enforcement agency, the one thing that I always like to say about HSI is like, we answer our phones and we'll come to the scene. So we are there to help right from the very beginning and work hand in hand with state and local or other federal law enforcement, so that the investment is there by our agency and supported to counter human trafficking in all its forms and however those leads will come to us. So and then we would just work the case hand in hand with whatever investigative agency brought it to us, or if we as an HSI agent got the lead in the tip ourselves, and we would use all of the resources needed, our non-governmental organizations, to make sure that we can get the information that we need for a successful investigation, but at the same time, we put as much emphasis as on victim recovery as we do for a successful prosecution.
What would you say, and I'd love to have you just expand on like the importance of partnerships within those, especially from a crisis response. How important are our partnerships and trusted partnerships within this field?
They're absolutely necessary. And like, as an agent working these cases since 2008, the partnerships and the relationships that I've made in all the different areas that I've worked, have are the only reason that I've been able to be successful as an investigator, because there's so many people that are invested in this space to assisting with when we identify a victim, because we can't do it alone. Like, even within our own organization, we have the victim assistance program where we have our forensic interview specialists and we have our victim assistance specialists. And without them to be able to assist in these investigations, it would be very, very hard, because as a case agent, you really need to focus on getting what you need for the case in order to make an arrest or do any kind of enforcement operation. Whereas then we can allow the forensic interview specialist to assist us with the interviews as needed, for the vulnerable adults and children. And then also the victim assistance specialists are kind of the coordinators for like the non-governmental organizational piece, where the victims can hopefully get assistance with housing, whatever their vulnerability is. We have those relationships with the non-governmental organizations to be able to hopefully get the assistance that they need, whether it's, if it's immigration related, put them in touch with a, non-governmental organization that can assist with immigration related services, and just really kind of make sure that we stay in touch all throughout, because we have to not necessarily monitor, but we have to be available for the victims in our cases. We never know when it is that they're going to need assistance. In some of these cases, like, not they're not all this long, but we just had a case from start to finish that went on for 10 years. And that was actually a trafficker in Delaware. That's a long investigation. That's a long time to make sure that the victims are safe and secure and have what they need. So from a headquarters standpoint, it looks very different. Obviously, we focus more on assisting, getting the funding and the support for the field agents out. But as a supervisor and as an investigator working human trafficking cases, that those cases look very different from being, overseen at a headquarters level than actually like boots on the ground working those investigations. And it's been a pleasure in my career to be able to see both sides of it and be able to be helpful from both sides.
That's incredible. 10 years. And sometimes I feel like, and even, you work in a space for so long, and sometimes, right, like humans are humans, and we're not 9 to 5s, and we're not cases that are going to be, fit into a nice little box all the time, right? So 10 years. So there's so much, especially just for 10 years, to be able to truly support that, and that's just one case, right? To support those survivors. Laura, I'd love to talk to you on, and I know that case was in Delaware, but bringing it back to Maryland for Maryland survivors on that, right? Like, okay, how would I put this? We all know that like an investigation is an investigation, right? Like that 10 years, that is a long investigation, but that survivor that is a lifelong experience for that survivor. So I'd love to talk to you about like what does Maryland have here, specifically like the track-it system and sexual assault kits, and being able to support survivors in a different way that might be a little bit. Well, I think it's pretty cool, but I'm also kind of biased on it. But being able to support survivors in that longevity of their healing.
Yeah, thanks. I find that the 10 years incredibly interesting, because that is 10 years for the survivor to continue working. In my work, specifically with the sexual assault evidence kits and the backlog, I'm working with survivors who had kits collected in the 80s and the 90s who are still living with that trauma today and are seeking answers and information that they didn't receive for decades. So I see that every day of that long-term impact that survivors often don't get the support throughout that duration. If they're not familiar with the services that are available, oftentimes, they don't have access, or they quote unquote slip through the cracks. So these types of programs are just so critical and important to connecting survivors, so they're not alone through that process. Um, in Maryland, we have certified rape crisis centers in every single county in the state. They offer free counseling services, free crisis intervention to survivors, and oftentimes their family members as well, because these cases, that's 10 years for the survivor, but also often their parents or another loved one, whether related by blood or not. So those rape crisis centers are critical. I've also seen like Debbie's forensic programs do excellent work where survivors, took years to realize what happened to them and have questions about their bodies and have questions about injuries they received. And many of our forensic programs in hospitals have stepped up to see that patient. Not necessarily to collect DNA evidence, but just to assess their bodies and talk with them because they have questions about what happened. Is this normal? Is this not normal? And they really need to talk to somebody. So IMCASA's programs work really hard to make sure that those survivors we work with and we hear from, we connect them to the right person in the right programs that can support them, whether that's Debbie's program in Baltimore City or somebody on the Eastern Shore, a CAC, investigators. Those relationships are probably the most critical thing that I see, is us building those relationships with other partners and really collaborating.
Debbie, what is a forensic exam?
Forensic exam is for the purpose of medical care and treatment, point blank. And everybody thinks it's to collect evidence. And sure, we may do that as part of the salad bar, if you will, of things that a patient can choose. We may collect biologic trace or photographic evidence, but primarily it's to talk to you like a nurse will talk to a patient. We also assure crisis intervention in the forms of safety or shelter or detox or follow-up counseling. But it's any intervention that we can provide them in whatever place they are in the continuum of their assault, that helps them heal in body and spirit. First and foremost, we believe our patients. We believe. It's written and translated into 9 languages in my waiting room wall. And I greet every patient, and I stopped counting the thousands and thousands of patients years ago. And I say, hi, my name's Debbie. And I don't know all the details of why you're here, but know this. I'm going to take such good care of you, and you're safe with me, and I believe you. And I watch people just relax. And that's part of how Blue Dot was built. It's trafficking patients who... I don't believe in just screening questions. I believe in looking for signs and having conversations, and that's what we teach. And they have no reason to trust us. Anybody they've ever trusted has violated them in some way generally, right? But nurses are in a very special place where we can talk to people because we just want to take care of them. And they'll test us. That some of the toughest patients I have are my trafficking patients, but we're here time and time again when they want to come back until they are maybe willing to, allow us to do something to help them. We're really unique because we don't have time frames. Yeah, the state says 15 days for a sexual assault kit because best science says that DNA is probably going to be around or in you for 14 days. So Maryland went with 15 days. But since collecting that kit is the least important thing that we do for most of our trafficking patients, most of them don't want that. Most of them just want somebody who will believe their story that is so outlandish and unbelievable, right? And that's the magic of how it happens when you come into a hospital environment where there are specialized people who will listen and who will care. And so we don't turn anybody away. We see people far outside of any time frames. We pioneer the use of alternate light source. So look at everybody, no matter how dark your skin is, no matter how long it's been after you tell me you've been strangled or you've had an assault, and we can still see marks there up to 32 days out. And so if you've been held hostage or you haven't been able to seek medical care, we're still able to find something that we can put away, and we can call it evidence, and we can validate what you're saying happened. And I think that's where a lot of people don't realize how priceless that is with patients, that you actually believe them and you validate them and you talk to them in a non-judgmental, trauma-informed way that lets them feel like they're important, right? That lets them feel like they are respected and that somebody cares. I also think it's important to note that kids don't have to have parents to sign for them to get these exams and to get these kits done, if you will. It falls under the State Reproductive Health Care Act, where you don't have to have a parent's permission. And that's good, because a lot of times parents are part of the problem. And parents are going to maybe trying to hide something in certain cases that we've seen. And it's also important to note that patients don't have to report to law enforcement. I don't care if you come into us unless there's certain parameters that meet the law, and I'm going to tell you if I have to call law enforcement. That being a weapon has been used against you in a stabbing or a shooting, I'm going to have to report that, right? Or there's certain times in a sexual assault of a child, there's certain parameters that I may have to call and report to CPS. But patients can be blind, not blind eyesight, but blind anonymous. And we won't call police. We won't violate that trust that they put in us. So I think they're important things to note.
I know in hearing you speak before or in the past, you had shared some really interesting insight. And if you're comfortable sharing that, I would love to hear how you guys, whenever you do have a human trafficking survivor come through and you have a blue dot, being able to do something with their cell phone or make sure that like they themselves are safe and that your team is also safe. I'd love if you could dive into that as well.
Sure. Well, one of the cool things that we've done is we did some scientific research to see what actually stops the GPS on a cell phone. And we found that airplane mode isn't it. They can still be GPSed. And so we wrap them in foil, and it works. One of the important things that we've done with Blue Dot is that we've trained all of our firefighters and all of our medics, like 680 or 1,000 medics, our liquor board inspectors, our fire inspectors. You can call 911 if you're trafficked in Baltimore City and say Blue Dot and be brought anonymously to us and have your cell phones protected so that nobody knows where you're coming or where you're being brought. And I think that's it's part of the systems working together. This isn't about us. This is about how well we've created magic in our collaboratives, in our communities, with our partners to bring together a system that helps people and protects them.
I love that. Systems, right? Like being able to fill a gap, find a need, and be creative. Everybody always knows one of my favorite sayings is creative solutions, and I think that that's just a really, like you said, it's magic. It's Maryland magic, and we're very grateful for Blue Dot being here. When I think about like coordinated systems, though, and that's I know really focused on clearly adults and trafficking, children as well. But when we talk about, and Wendy, I want to go to you. When we talk about that, like coordinated system response, what really makes a child advocacy center and maybe family justice centers that are in different counties across Maryland, why is that system response so critical, especially in child abuse cases?
Yeah, thank you. So the CACs are child friendly. I think Kathy might have touched a little bit on child friendly services. And we do collaborate to bring all of the investigative partners together. And the investigative team would be Child Protective Services, law enforcement, the prosecutor's office. But we also bring together advocates, forensic interviewers, trauma therapists, medical providers. So all of these different systems come together to form a circle of care around each child. So the model really reduces wait time for services. It ensures that there's professional collaboration. It's actually mandated in the state of Maryland for every jurisdiction to have an MDT, a multidisciplinary team response to child abuse, and that includes all those partners that I just mentioned. But it does reduce wait times as well because you don't have to, figure out who's going to provide what. You already know those systems are in place. So it does reduce the trauma associated with abuse, obviously, for children and families because of all those reasons. It's also a good investment because it's a better way to, when you collaborate, right? You save resources, you share resources. So CACs and family justice centers all provide that same or similar response to crimes against children. Different communities do have various responses to the crime, and there's different models, different organizational structures across the state of Maryland and really across the US. But all do follow, well, hopefully, I know in Maryland, they all follow our Maryland state mandates. That's really all I can speak to, and requirements. But they might have oversight or structure that's different, might vary depending on jurisdictional priorities or different funding sources. Sometimes with children's justice centers or family justice centers, they incorporate also the intimate partner violence unit from that jurisdiction, or if they have a separate trafficking task force that's just jurisdictional specific, that might be part of that team as well. So there are lots of other teams involved in the CAC response, but they're all that multidisciplinary response that has the investigative component, but also resources for healing.
Kathy, I want to throw it over to you as well. Didn't know if you had anything to add to that, or I do have a follow-up question about CACs, but I didn't know if you have anything else to follow up with.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that it can look different anywhere you are, right? Like it really looks different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. For example, Center for Hope has a lot of in-house services. So we have our mental health clinic right there. We have our medical clinic right in the same building. Very soon, we will have some of our law enforcement officers in the sex abuse and family crimes unit housed at Center for Hope. And also we have space for CPS to be there as well. So we have our advocates on site. We have really just a lot of the services that Center for Hope provides are in-house. But if you go somewhere like, for example, Prince George's County, they often refer out for their mental health. They have a clinic for medical exams there as well, but they also partner with the hospitals in the community too. So it really can look different depending on which jurisdiction you're in. And so it's just really cool to see that while, the mandate is that everyone needs to have an MDT, it doesn't necessarily all look the same, and not every jurisdiction works the same way. So what works for Center for Hope in Baltimore City may not work in a community like Montgomery County. So it's really great that, there is flexibility on how a jurisdiction can structure their resources and their partnerships. And you got to do what works for your community, right? And for the people that you're serving. Some services don't work for others, and that's okay. And so there is flexibility, and it's great to know that, you can be in one county that is, working one way, and then you go just to the next county over and they're doing things a little bit differently. So it really is just a team effort.
I thank you for saying that, because I think sometimes we also have and I'm gonna get into misconceptions here, but like this misconception that like everything that's in every county should be the same blanket across all the counties. And realistically, that's just not what Maryland is, right? Like Maryland is so vast and so different, and that's one of the beauties about Maryland. And I think that can be a misconception sometime of like, well, yeah, like you have 24 CACs, like they're all just the same, right? But when you actually get into it, and even not just CACs, but like resources, I know for regional navigators, the same thing of really catering to your community, right? And like being a part of that community and giving back to them. And like we had talked about, like creative solutions and filling gaps. And that does look totally different. I'm on the Eastern Shore. It looks totally different in Worcester County, where me and Wendy are, than Allegheny County or Montgomery County or Charles County. So I'm gonna circle back to Kara real quick. I didn't tell you guys this, but I'm gonna ask everybody this. I want to dive into these misconceptions because now you got my brain going. And I'll start with Kara. What would you say is a misconception within your work that might shift people in their understanding about your work?
I think one of the major misconceptions is, and this is for everybody actually on this call, you're going to see it too, is that every people think that victims or survivors, always want to be rescued, and they're always going to cooperate, and they're always going to come forward, and they're always going to be happy to see you coming in with a badge and a gun. I mean, Debbie was talking about how it's hard to gain the trust as a medical practitioner. It's very difficult sometimes for law enforcement, because typically, a lot of our survivors have had several interactions with law enforcement previously. So they don't want to have anything to do with disclosing anything to law enforcement unless we're able to build that rapport and gain that trust. And I love when that Debbie said, I believe you, right? Because you can always, as a law enforcement investigator, like my job is to be able to corroborate what a victim or survivor is telling us, but believing and getting their trust is it's an easy thing to do, in that it's going to be rewarding for both, because we're going to gain the trust of the survivor or the victim that is the identified victim in the case. We're going to be able to help them. And guess what? We still have to do our jobs. So at the end of the day, if we prove that what they're telling us isn't true, well, then we've at least, we have at least somewhere to go with that. If we start out as not being trusted or not providing the care and belief in what the story that they're telling us or their experience, that then we can't ever get that trust back typically. And that's why we harp so much on the victim-centered approach, right? Go into those interactions with a potential, identified victim, and listen to their story. Tell them that you believe what they're telling you, because in the end, you're still going to have to work towards, the investigation and finding out, corroborating information and evidence that you have. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception. Also, just the general misconception of I think when you hear human trafficking, everybody thinks it has to involve foreign nationals, and we, in our work that we all do, we have a lot of U.S. citizen children, adult U.S. citizens that are victims of human trafficking. Even that Delaware case, which also had a lot of crossover into Maryland, because I was working on the Eastern Shore at the time. That's a forced labor case and a sex trafficking case involving U.S. citizens. So we don't see them very often, but forced labor, absolutely. U.S. citizens can be involved in forced labor cases. Is it the majority that we see? No, most of the forced labor cases involve foreign national victims, but it is possible. So it's kind of like, open your eyes to it all, because you never know what you're going to have in front of you. And you just have to be receptive to the fact that not every human trafficking case is going to present in the same exact way.
Okay, I'm going to still be on my train of misconceptions. Does anybody else want to chime in about misconceptions, specifically within your framework?
I would say for CAC investigations, a common misconception is that there's evidence. Very rarely do we have, evidence collection happening in um, in our cases. And also, you know, even beyond that, there's a misconception that it's the scary stranger, in the bushes thing. That only happens about 5% of the time in Maryland and across the country. About 90 to 95% of the time, victimization happens, as a result of the maltreater establishing a relationship with that person or already having an established relationship.
I think
I
the most
wanted
common I think the most common misconception that I hear is that these movies like Taken and these ones that are out there and that's what it looks like. And I'm not going to say it's never happened that way, but I can tell you that's not what we see. I mean, what we're seeing right now are children. I can tell you we've had almost 30 children in the last 2 months that are have ACEs scores that are off the charts, right? Those adverse childhood or community experiences where they've got their trauma built upon trauma built upon trauma, who are 10, 12, 13-year-old kids who blame themselves for things that are happening to them because this is just one more thing that's happening. And so it's not about what you see in the movies. That's the big misconception I see.
Yeah, and speaking a little bit more specifically about forensic interviews, I think a common misconception about that is that forensic interviews are results driven. Like the goal of a forensic interview is to get a disclosure and to get information, where an interviewer is not going into an interview with a victim looking for specific information. We might have a report and might have some very brief information on what, someone has reported, but we can get into the interview and it could go entirely different direction. Sometimes we interview people and don't get any disclosure at all. And at no point is a forensic interviewer, keeping a child in a room when they haven't disclosed to try to fish the information out like that. We're not doing that. It is not an interrogation. It is not meant to hold a kid in the room until they talk about what happened. A child is free, or anybody, a victim is free to talk about anything, right? I talked earlier about, you know, it is meant to be the interviewer is led, not the other way around. We're not leading an interviewee. So there are certain things that come from a forensic interview that we would have never thought we were going to get, and vice versa. Sometimes we think we're going in there with who we think the alleged maltreater is, and then we get in there and it's a completely different, named person or multiple people. And so we're not at all ever trying to land on a disclosure. We are going in there with a completely open mind, just looking to gather whatever facts, whether they are related to the report we have or not. So that is a misconception that most people think of a forensic interview as kind of like an interrogation, that we're going in there to get to basically confirm what we think we know. That's not our goal there.
I have a couple misconceptions, so please with me. The first, given that I deal with the actual evidence kits for the most part, is that testing is quick. Or a lot of survivors also feel that the testing, DNA testing, occurs at hospitals. So sometimes they're not realizing that it goes to law enforcement and that testing can take quite a long time. I think currently, it looks like the average is a little just under or just over a year for DNA testing to be complete from a sexual assault evidence kit or a rape kit. That's a lot longer than people believe based on TV, and it really slows down investigations. I will give a shout out since Debbie's here. Debbie in Baltimore City, I think they have the shortest turnaround time for testing rape kits, and it's like under 90 days. They're doing excellent over there. So, I mean, in comparison, we have ones like 350 days. I've seen years. And that can be really hard for the survivor. But I think the other misconception is that sometimes people believe that if time has passed, the survivor doesn't want to know the results of their testing if it's bad news. So I've seen a lot of people make assumptions that, like, oh, no DNA was found, this is going to be bad news, so we're not going to tell the survivor. or there was DNA, but we didn't have a hit. We don't know who did this to them yet. So we're not going to tell the survivor. And what I've learned in my program, we've contacted almost 800 survivors whose kits were part of the backlog. So dating back to the 80s and 90s, and you can never make an assumption about what information that survivor wants. I've had conversations with people who were assaulted in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and they've said they've thought about it every single day of their lives. It has stuck with them. And just knowing that the kit was finally tested is what they needed, regardless of what the results are. So I think it's really important. And I, as an advocate, don't appreciate it when professionals with the right perception, I think, not to cause harm, but then they also inadvertently make decisions on behalf of the survivor or think that they're too fragile to handle information. So I really think it's a misconception that some people believe that survivors don't want that information. The other misconception, and Debbie kind of touched on this already, and we might be talking about it later, and then this is it, I promise, for my misconceptions, is that you can just go to any hospital for a forensic medical exam. You can't, there are specific ones in Maryland, about one per county, and some counties don't have any programs. So it's really critical why Debbie's program is so wonderful with that mobile option and secure staffing and things are really critical, but you really can't walk into any hospital and ask for that care. And I guess a fourth misconception, Debbie already touched on it, is just that the forensic exam is just about evidence collection. It's about so much more than that, like Debbie said. And I'll just put a caveat in there. I know Debbie said that they see anyone in Baltimore City at mercy, regardless of how long has passed since the assault. I will say that's not necessarily true for every SAFE program or forensic program in Maryland. Some of them have very hard cutoffs of like, if it's beyond 15 days, if it's beyond 5 days, they will not see the patient. I would just caution any providers or service providers who may encounter that. They can connect with MCASA and we'll try and get them connected with a program who's willing to step up and see somebody beyond that time frame, like Debbie's program or a couple others in the state that really don't care what the time frame is. They'll see the patient.
Our
And we're
CAC
not,
do
I'm
provide
sorry.
services for children at any time, though. So if it's a child, they can receive that forensic exam at the CAC or with their partner that provides medical. So I know you were talking about adults, but I just wanted to
No, thank you for that, because that was
clarification.
really important because I didn't specify specifically. So thank you for chiming in, Wendy.
One other thing that's misconceived, that patients are going to get bills, and there will never be a bill, at least from my program, because I vet everything that goes out for a sexual assault exam. They will never get a bill, nor will their insurance company. And Blue Dot is totally free. We're talking everything that you can possibly imagine as far as care, including surgery, and we will write it all off, because this human trafficking that we call this Blue Dot community response that's again the magic of it, is that it all works out financially, right? It has nothing to do about billing patients and billing insurances and assuring that people have insurance. They don't. They're lucky they have an ID that's their real name. And so there will never be a bill generated.
I love that, Debbie, and props to Mercy. I will say at our Sexual Assault Legal Institute, we see survivors get appropriately billed all the time. Not from Mercy. I don't think I've ever seen that from Mercy. But sometimes if something's selected incorrectly in the system or it just slips through the billing department's radar, sometimes survivors do get billed. I think Max doing so much in the chat, but survivors can contact our Sexual Assault Legal Institute and we'll work directly with the hospitals to get those bills cleared, because in Maryland, the law says a survivor of sexual assault cannot be billed at any time for medical services. To be very clear, that is sexual assault specific. So somebody getting a forensic exam for intimate partner violence, domestic violence, anything else, that is not necessarily the case. So that billing piece statewide is sexual assault specific.
I really appreciate the misconceptions. And I know we're like a little bit pushing time, but we have until 7:30, and I have one more question for all of you. I feel like we can make this fast. We can make this thorough, however you guys want it. My from from a perspective of just like complete layman, like I'm a community member, I am a mom, I am a daughter, I am a wife. What do I need to know that let's say I find myself in one of these positions. What do I need to know that could help me not like inadvertently compromise any investigation or maybe like harm a survivor? What would be like the big mistakes to avoid, whether you're like a full layman, just like really passionate community member, or whether you've been in this field for 40 years and just want more additional knowledge? What would you say anyone could do or not do to not maybe like mess things up? And I told you guys I was going to start with somebody and then I didn't start with anybody. So I'll go ahead. I'll start with Wendy.
Okay, thank you. So I would say, I think it was Debbie that said this. The first thing you have to do is believe the child. If a child or an adult discloses something to you, your first response should be, I believe you. And then, of course, you're going to want to make sure if, the child's not safe, you call 911. Um, if if it's not the kind of situation, well, that the individual is in, danger right now, you can call 1-800-91-PREVENT. It's 1-800-91-PREVENT. And that is the for children, for child abuse. That's our child abuse hotline in Maryland. But of course, if the child's in immediate danger, certainly call 911. And but most importantly, believe the child. I would say what not to do is ask 1,000 questions. Parents frequently, if they have suspicions, they think they're helping, to provide all this information to the investigators, leaving that part to the people who are neutral and trained to do that work, is better for your child, better for the investigation, and certainly better for you as a parent. So just, resisting um, the desire to find out more yourself and allowing the professionals to investigate.
Can I add on to that? I think my response is gonna be, it goes beautifully with what Wendy just said, is also to, if you're a parent, keep in mind your reaction. Like we said, believe the child first, but children often look for the reaction of an adult to see and feel whether continuing to disclose is safe. What we've learned from research is that disclosure is a process. It's not a one-time thing. Children don't come out and say everything and all the details in that moment. And so oftentimes children will give a little nugget of information to see if it's safe to continue to do so. And so if you are a parent, if you are a teacher, or somebody who a child is entrusting to give this information to, remember to keep calm, remember to let them know and feel that you believe them, and let them know that you're going to help, right? I may not have all the answers, but I am going to help you find someone who is going to help you if I can't do that. So your reaction sends a humongous message. And if a child feels like they've upset you, or that you're angry, or that you're overly emotional, while of course you have every right to be emotional, keep in mind that a child is watching you, and your reaction oftentimes will dictate if they feel that it's safe to continue to provide more information. So keep that in mind, and just let people feel safe around you, because if you are the person who someone is trusting and taking that first step in talking about a really terrible thing that has happened, what they need in that moment is safety and support. And it's really important for you to show up in an appropriate way.
And I'm just going to chime in and say ditto for adults and older people as well. I think it's just, and I see it all the time where people, like, the disclosure is very slow and progressive, and they're scared of that reaction, scared they won't be believed. And as soon as you become that safe, trusted person, then they can. And typically then I work not to abandon somebody with that. So as a service provider, oftentimes I do a warm handoff. But then I continue to check in with that survivor to make sure things are going well. And the thing that I find fascinating that Kara said about believing somebody, even from an investigator standpoint, I see that a lot from law enforcement where they're like, oh, I can't do that because I'm neutral. But it does actually build a rapport. And when I've sat down with survivors who I've worked with many survivors who have said, I do not want to talk to law enforcement directly. Do not give them my phone number. Everything needs to go through you. And then when the group of us finally sit down and law enforcement says, "Look, I'm really sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry it took us so long to test your rape kit, but I'm here to help you now." The relief and the trust that comes with that. I've left so many of those meetings where the survivor's like, "Yeah, I don't need you anymore. This detective's fine." And I'm like, "Okay, I met my goal." But it all comes from that initial interaction. And that goes for adults and parents as well. No matter how old the survivor is, being that safe space is critical. Because if you aren't that and they don't have that in anyone else, they will shut down and the abuse, the trafficking things will continue.
And we designed a free app for Android and iPhones. It's called Be More Safe. The letter B, MORESAFE, Be More Safe. And it explains in third grade language, as a victim, as somebody who wants to help, what do you do? What do you not do? Don't save evidence. Don't go to a crime scene. Don't throw everything in a bag together because it contaminates things, right? But that'll give you really good advice on what to do and options for places to go. And a lot of our community partners are listed there, including military bases and the Safe Helpline as well for our military partners.
I think from a law enforcement standpoint, real quick, I think we don't like to see vigilante justice, right? We don't want a community member to get a tip or to discover something and then start investigating it on their own, because not only is it risking their safety, the survivor's safety, but also it could wind up messing up whatever evidence we could get or other parts of the investigation. So that's what I always like to say when we're talking to community stakeholders. Like, we have our DHS tip line, we have the human trafficking hotline. You can go and report to us directly or the Center for Countering Human Trafficking, and we have a direct line of communication with our HSI field offices, and we can farm the lead to the appropriate office. And or we have the Homeland Security task forces now, which I don't know if you all are aware of that, but one of the main focal points of their investigative portfolio we're trying to make sure is human trafficking, because they're going to be investigating those more violent crimes and those drug related offenses where we have a lot of drug based coercion, human trafficking cases right now. So they might be the first ones to identify those. And the other piece of advice I would give too is we at the CCHT, we have the Blue campaign now incorporated into the center through the Counter Human Trafficking Act of 2021, which is fantastic because we have training that we do from the law enforcement standpoint, but we also have the Blue campaign, which is the largest anti-human trafficking public awareness campaign in the U.S. In the world, really. So they have the free downloadable resources that you can use, or you can reach out to us directly and we can, we don't have all the materials physically at the center, but we have a warehouse and we can mail them out to you. But a lot of them are free and downloadable on the Blue Campaign website. So, print that stuff out, have it hanging up in your facilities or pass it out. And, we don't want necessarily everybody to go and do public outreaches that aren't prepared. But having the materials and getting educated on what human trafficking can look like is a really good first step.
And many of our counties have strong coalitions. Join a coalition. Find out when they're doing community awareness events or the Red Sand Project, right? To fill in the gap and draw attention, and things where you can maybe not be integrated with victims themselves for obvious reasons, but still promote awareness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Thank you guys so much. Those are some incredible tidbits. Let's see. I'm going to pass it over to Melinda Mack. And I know we have this chat was popping off. So I know we have a good amount of questions